Hello, hello, good morning, and welcome to another episode of Journey to SEA 2025. If this is your first session, thank you so much for joining me. And we're going to have a really good one today, talking more about vocabulary for reports, the plotting for narratives, and an introduction to fiction comprehension. And if it is your returning, thank you for sharing your time with me again. And you know what we're about. We know, you know how we go through the schedule, and you know who I am. But for those who are new, let me just give a little bit about who I am and what I'm about so that you could understand where I'm coming from when it comes to teaching the creative writing and the comprehension. So, I am Shelley Ann Edwards Barron. I am a creative writing specialist. And, it's funny thing, a student asked me, I think it was last week, she said, Miss, how long have you been a creative writing specialist? And, I had to stop and think because I realized that I've only started using that term, creative writing specialist, recently, but I have actually been teaching writing for quite a long time. It's coming up to like 3 decades, and I'm checking my age when when I say that, but I really consider myself a creative writing specialist because I don't actually look at the creative writing just for the writing itself. I actually look at writing from multiple perspectives, mainly focusing on the ideas and how students express themselves and express their ideas. And that's the reason I consider myself a creative writing specialist. And so I work with something called multisensory learning. And the multisensory learning really is a term and a set of activities that promote the learning of any content through the interaction with multiple senses at a time or at least in succession. And what that means is that I focus a lot on getting students engaged, not just with, okay, give them some information and then they practice, but actually having them experience the language. And when I say experience it, I mean experience the concepts in many different ways. So we do experiments, we do practical activities, play games, we do artwork, all so that students can actually explore writing and explore their ideas through multiple perspectives. So that kind of instruction works best with students who are really struggling. They're not able to connect the ideas, they're missing something in their writing. They have some idea of what they want to write, but they don't know how to put it down on paper. And that is the group that I really work with. I also work with students who have some ideas, but they don't know how to make them better. So their writing is okay, but they want to go to the next level. And going to the next level usually means thinking differently. And so that's where all the interactions and the discussions and so on come in. So, we look at videos and do all kinds of different things in exploring writing so that writing, it moves from just that, theoretical stuff and words only to practical experiences that students can hold on to and use as they go through their writing and writing development. Now, as you can imagine, that is not something that's going to happen overnight. And it's something that usually takes some time, which is why we start the journey to SEA, real focus in April of the previous year. So we're going on to 2025 now, and we're in 2024, and we're moving fairly slowly in the beginning, step by step, to really give students the foundation that they need. But ideally, if it is you really want to get the most solid foundation possible with creative writing, you need to start earlier. And in terms of like SEA preparation specifically, you want to begin that in standard three. But when it comes to writing in general, standard one, in terms of, laying that foundation toward SEA, standard one is ideal. Of course, first year and second year, there are things that you can do to help students activate their imagination. but we're really looking at the sentence structure and writing concepts in one and two, and then we can start bringing that together with more detailed and direct information for SEA in standard three. Because I know that sometimes parents get to the point where they want to see things happening now in terms of the writing when they engage with any kind of tutoring and so on. The only way to really get that is to kind of tell students what to write. But the multisensory learning approach is meant to activate student imagination and engage students in a way that help them create their own processes for thinking and develop their creativity. Because there's one thing, I actually was having a conversation with a parent the other day, and I was explaining to him that when it comes to narrative writing, many students don't really understand why they have to engage with narrative writing, you know. But narrative writing activates creativity. Yes, we know that with the descriptive language and so on. But there's a lot of critical thinking in writing a story because there are lots of decisions to make, especially when it comes to plotting, which we're going to be talking about today. And it actually helps students process information in a kind of linear, projected way that helps them to see the bigger picture. And that's what you really want, to get them to see that bigger picture and how their ideas fit into it. So, yeah, I'm in a kind of reflective mood this morning, so I just wanted to share that before we get into things because I've been thinking a lot about the activities that I do with my students and how effective they are. I've been creating new activities, creating worksheets, and so on, which reminds me, near the end of this session when we're in the comprehension, I have a worksheet is finally ready, one of them, and the other one is going to be finished this weekend. So I could show you now and let you know how you can get a copy if you want to get that. It has to do with vocabulary. Um, so it is in context with what we're talking about today with the report vocabulary, but it goes beyond that. And it's a really interactive program. I think I mentioned it before, but it wasn't ready at that time. So I'm going to go through and, show you what it kind of looks like today. All right. So let's get into it. Thank you for your patience. And, I'm off my soapbox and we're getting into the topics today. So, what are we covering today? Let's see. Um, yeah, and I don't know how to switch this off. The presentation, I want not autoplay. It keeps giving me autoplay, and I do not want autoplay because when I pause the autoplay, it gives me that little thing in the middle that I don't think you get to see everything. I think I got it this time. All right, so we're on episode 7, and today we're talking formal vocabulary again, and we're going to be going to plotting stories because at this point you want students to be plotting stories. And I'm going to revisit the difference between plotting and planning and why we want plotting and not just planning. And then we're going to be talking about reading fiction. So we're getting into fiction comprehension, so we're finished with the review of nonfiction, and now we're shifting our focus to fiction. So let's get started with the report writing formal vocabulary. Now, for the past 3 weeks, we've been talking about formal language, formal tone, how to use it effectively, what it could look like, the fact that formal tone is actually much more than just the vocabulary words. And we've actually been looking at getting formal tone with different concepts, and we are going to be talking a bit more about those concepts, as we go. But we know there's reported speech, passive voice, um, different structures with sentences as well that can help you achieve the formal tone. But of course, the foundation for formal tone, yes, we have the sentence structure, the grammar, and everything, we do need to make sure students have sufficient vocabulary and formal vocabulary that they can use throughout their writing. And this is not going to come naturally because we don't speak formally on a regular basis. Well, not most of us anyway. Even though I teach it, I always sort of how do I put it? I make my classes very relatable. And when I engage with parents and even my colleagues, I try to make it as relatable as possible. So I don't utilize a lot of the formal words as, the kind of writing students have to do for report writing. So even the average person in a formal setting doesn't use the formal words, the kind of formal words that would be in a written report or another professional document. It's just more relatable to break it down and make it more familiar. But the formal vocabulary, there are a couple of things I want to remind you about the formal vocabulary. And we're starting with what actually makes a word formal. I know this might sound kind of like repetitious, but because we've had conversations about formal language and formal tone already, but it's worth repeating because it's something that sometimes we get students going in one or the other direction. And they think, well, okay, I use these words, so, as long as I say it clearly, that's enough. And even students who understand about leaving their opinions out of reports and so on, they could still fall into the trap of not using sufficient formal vocabulary. And so these are the reasons. Now, of course, this is for parents and teachers to understand. And then I'll share with you how you can get it across to the students. So, what makes a word formal? So, the first thing is the complexity of the word. Formal words tend to be a bit longer. They tend to have, when I say longer, like more letters in the word. They also tend not to be compound words, like figure out. Instead of figure out, we will say determined and those types of things. So there is a certain level of complexity in the word itself, how many letters, the way it's pronounced, and that type of thing. And so we have an example there, approximately and about. So we don't want to say, we arrived about 4 o'clock, at about 4 o'clock. We want to say we arrived at approximately 4 p.m. And so those subtle changes in terms of the length of that word, it makes a difference in the perception of formality. And that's another thing that we need to consider when it comes to formal language and formal tone in writing. It's the perception of this. And we also need to pay attention to a balance of this formality because you can actually go a little bit overboard. But we'll get to that as soon as I'm finished with these three ideas here. So complexity is one, so the length of the word and how the word is pronounced. Then we have the context in terms of, okay, is this an everyday word that I hear people using all the time? If it is an everyday word that you hear people using all the time, chances are there is an alternative that would be considered more formal. Because you see, the issue behind formality has to do with a certain level of, I guess I could call it exclusivity. Maybe I should have put that instead of context. But formal language, formal vocabulary is reserved for certain contexts. And that's why I use the word context here. So we use it for professional documents, academic documents that are presented within certain situations. And so there is a certain level of, like I said, exclusivity. It's not the everyday language, it's not the everyday word. We have to add something a little bit extra, use the less frequently used terms so that readers can perceive a sense of formal tone and formality in the writing because hey, this is not everyday language here, so now I know, okay, yeah, there's a little bit more formality here simply because of the words that I use. They're not the regular everyday words that I would have in normal conversation, when I'm joking around, I'm having fun, that kind of thing. Not the not that kind of word, because of the context and the level of formality. There's a little bit of exclusivity with it there. And so when you get students thinking along those lines, then they would start looking for additional words that they could use. So it's not enough just to tell them, hey, um, formal language, formal vocabulary, use these words, and you give them a list. You want students to reach to a point where they can make selections for themselves, and they're not necessarily regurgitating or giving um, what I would call, you know, a standard structured repetitive format. You want them to be able to make choices. So you might want to give them 5 words, and, depending on the situation, they choose one or another. And so they really do need to understand that formal perception of a word and not just think of it as, I'm using formal vocabulary. We always go back to the reader. How is the reader going to receive this? Is the reader going to consider it formal? That's the issue. And how is the reader going to understand what it is we're saying? And then finally, in the list, we're looking at being very precise. Now, we spoke about this before in terms of the context of a report. Reports need to be precise, concise, etc. Well, it has to do with the vocabulary as well. So if you look at those 2 words, examined versus looked at is everyday casual, and it kind of gives you the idea of sort of casually glancing at something. And to say looked at, if you want somebody to understand that you are analyzing something or going into more detail, if you use looked at, you have to add other words to it. So you might have to say, looked at more closely, or, looked at in detail. So you have to add to it in order to get the idea across. You get that same idea if you use the word examined. One word that means looked at more closely or looked at in detail. So the word itself actually shows more precision and a more direct approach to expressing the idea. And so this is what I mean when I say precision. So you can use one word in the place of looked at more closely or looked at in detail, so 4 words. So we can use one word in the place of 4 words, and that is going to help us be more concise as well as be more precise in the way we are expressing ourselves. So that is why the formal vocabulary creates that kind of perception in readers. It's because of that selection of a most appropriate word that replaces many more words. So when it comes to the formal vocabulary, you want to help students gather words that they could use. And this is something that is going to be ongoing. So I do recommend a journal. And I just realized I wanted to share something with you before we get to the journal, because we are going to get to the journal. I'm going to talk about creating a vocabulary journal. But just quickly before that, um, I want to add a little word of caution here when it comes to the formal vocabulary and the formal structure. I've mentioned it before, but I need to keep saying it because I still see it in student writing, where students go to the other extreme and they want to be so formal that they add extra words, or they use, um, I would say, pretentious terminology. And again, remember, we're trying to hit a middle mark in terms of formal enough as opposed to the extra bit. So The way I look at it, think of it like you are working with, like, an academic document, as opposed to standing in the royal court of His Majesty Prince Philip. Um, so we want to make sure the formality is at the correct level. And so I had a student once who would use words like aforementioned and thereafter and thenceforth and those kinds of terminologies. Again, because of the idea of wanting to be formal. But then there are levels of formality, and the level of formality that students are at primary school level doing a report is not the kind of formality that you would get that would require a term like, thenceforth or thereafter. Those are much higher levels of formality. And so while we want to work with the vocabulary and get students to understand the formal tone and the formal language, we really do want to be careful with the going a little bit overboard. So thereafter, the aforementioned students proceeded to the classrooms. The thing with a report, as I said just now, we're not only going for formal, we're going for precise and direct and concise. And so when we get a combination of formal, precise, and concise, we inadvertently eliminate some of the extra terms like thereafter and aforementioned. That would be a little more than is required at this level. So thereafter, the aforementioned students proceeded to the classrooms becomes after the assembly, the standard 5 students proceeded to their classrooms. And so we get two changes there. We get after the assembly, which locates the action within a sequence of events, which is important for reports. And then we get the standard 5 students, which is precise who the students are that we're talking about. And then we have proceeded to their classrooms, which again precise where they are going. So they're not going to classrooms in general, they're going to their standard 5 student classroom. And so getting into being precise allows you to dial it down a little bit and keep it within the most appropriate level of formality, as well as it helps with students using their language more effectively. So we're getting the formal vocabulary, but we're also keeping it within the appropriate level of formality. So there is a balance that is required. All right. So yeah, I really had to kind of reiterate that because before let me say this before I continue. We will probably have the conversation about pronouns over and over and over because there are some people who believe that students should not use any pronouns or especially personal pronouns, and because of that, the way the sentences are structured and, students write themselves into the report as a third person, almost as if they're calling themselves, by name kind of thing. And what happens is that that makes sentences unnecessarily complicated, and it goes to a level of formality, and sometimes it makes things inaccurate or difficult to understand, which is important in a report because remember, we're giving information for a purpose. So I mentioned this on those grounds as well related to pronouns. You can use pronouns. The issue is overusing them and therefore sounding casual. So I'm going to probably be coming back to that over and over because it's something that comes up all the time, because there is this understanding somewhere that formal reports do not use pronouns, especially first person pronouns. That is not true. They do use pronouns, including first person pronouns, but we do have to be careful with them because of the level of formality we're trying to build and maintain. All right, so let's talk about the journal now that would help with this. The journals that relate to vocabulary really should be something that students use and maintain over time. Now, I advocate using guided journals, and I know I've been speaking about this a lot. So I've decided that I'm going to put together a journal so that, you can have one for, I was thinking like do one for reports, one for narratives, but we can do one creative writing journal. So we have the reports on one side, the narratives on the other side. Um, haven't decided exactly how to work it out, but I'm hoping to have it finished and ready for the vacation period because that is an awesome time when students can really feel free to express and, you know, collect the data and the information that they're going to need come September and when the exam is. So it's never really a good idea to just give student a word and say, learn this word. We want students to have an experience around the word, and whether that experience is an actual practical experience where they've gone out into the world and done some things, or a manufactured experience where they do an activity. You really do want students to experience language, not just write it down. So this journal is not a list of words only. A list is a great way to start, but you don't want to have this journal being a list of words only. You want to have, interactive things. You might need some artwork. You might need some, cutouts and stickers and different things that could represent whatever the word is. You want sentences. You might want an entire paragraph, different activities that help students sort of experience the word. That's the best term that I could come up with. But it's kind of like there's actually a term. Oh, and it's slipping me now. I'll look it up and I'll try to remember to put it in the chat. Um, but it's really about exploring vocabulary. Students don't use vocabulary single words, and they don't use vocabulary just by words and definitions. They need to actually sort of engage with it. That's the better way to help them remember it. And so that's the best way to actually go about building vocabulary. So the simplest way to do this is to create a journal. And I suppose I said I'd do it at the end, but I think now is as good a time as any. Let me share with you the vocabulary booklets that I'm working on. I'll call it. I'm gonna look for this. Yeah, I thought about it kind of like today just before the session, even though I was thinking, hey, this is something that I should really be sharing because I shared about it before. I kind of mentioned it, but it was not available. This time it is going to be available. And all right, let me just do two things. um what are we looking for? Yeah, it it's as I was talking about the engaging with the vocabulary and engaging with the language. That's the kind of thing you want to do, and you want to do it with like comprehension and practical activities, some simple fun ones, um, and different other things, but you know not just having the word itself and like what's the definition of this, find the definition, different things. So I am just doing a quick dropping the word sample on it because I just realized that the way I have it is just complete and open, but I really want to show you Some of it won't be like all of the things, but I'll show you just a few because I am particularly proud of this effort simply because of how long it kind of took to get it done and how useful I think it would be in terms of building, actually like building vocabulary with students in a fun and interesting way so that it's not just about you know words and vocabulary. So all right, I think that would be it. So okay, so I could share screen now. All right, let me go back up. And is the screen sharing yet? No, it's not. All right, let's try this again then. And now we are sharing screen. Right? So yeah, so there it is. So I call it a word study because, as I said, it is really about exploring and experiencing language. And so my colleague and I'm doing this as a joint project with a lady who is a reading specialist. She works with students who have dyslexia and different challenges, who are struggling to learn to read. So we're working on some specifically reading stuff, but these vocabulary word study, it's focused interactive worksheets. That is exactly what they are. So let me show you what that means. Um, these are the list of activities that are offered. So there's a focus, so we tell you what words we're focusing on, and each package covers like 10 words. There's a word list, word cards with then we have definition cards, reading passage just to introduce the words in context. Then we have word study one, we're exploring antonyms and synonyms, picture dictionary where the students create their own picture dictionary, word study two, which is fill in the blank, word study three, you have to finish sentences. So you're using ideas and exploring how to express yourself with this word that you're learning. Then we have task cards. The task cards, I'll show you in a bit. These are activities that students would engage in and then collate their responses. Then there's a reading comprehension using the words that are being studied. Um, then we have the word study four, which is reviewing the synonyms and antonyms. What we've done before, you can get new ones, matching words with related ideas. So we have like the list of words, and then students have to match up the ideas. And then there's a quiz and practical activity. So let's see what some of those things would look like, right? So this one is the first booklet that we did, which would be the FLE and PLE endings. So we have 5 words FLE, 5 words PLE, and this is meant to be done over the course of a week, maybe a little bit into the next week. But there are multiple activities that students could do, 1 or 2 activities a day, so that they're really engaging with the words. And it's not necessarily meant to cover like a term or anything like that. Definitely not meant to be done in one day, but we're going through. So these are the word cards, and this is digital so that you could print it onto like, card stock so that you could cut it out and students could use. Then we have the definition cards, and then we have the reading, then we have the word study, comprehension, the task cards where they have to do different things, which word does not belong, sniffle, eyes, sneeze, nose. So they have to choose the word that is not fitting with the others, get some thinking and doing stuff. Lots of activities there. Those are the And then this is a comprehension. And then we have, that's pretty much the end of the package. This is package one. And we're finishing up package 2, which would be on ABLE words this weekend. After that, we're doing IBLE words. So pretty much what we're going to do. So the package 1 is currently available if you want to try it out and see what it's like. We'd be offering the package 1 at an introductory cost of just, I think, let me check that before I say the wrong figure. I think it's, yeah, $40 is the introductory figure. The other packages, as we add packages, those would be about $50. And then, of course, when we have multiple packages, you can get them in groups and sets. And when we have that, we're going to be adding more comprehension as well. And so this is a way to really engage the student. If you're interested in the package, you can find me in SCA Peacefield, or you can just WhatsApp me if you want to check it out and see. Um, right, so I'm going to put my number up, 717-4993, and then the word study, which would be $40 for the word study. So they're about, let's see, I think there are quite a few activities. Let me see if I think they're like about 12 activities. Um, with the student, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's about 14, right? So 14 different activities, exploring the words, and we're getting comprehension, we're getting spelling, we're getting, lots of different activities working together. So students are exploring the vocabulary. And I just remembered what the word was the concept was that I was trying to think of before. Word consciousness. That's what it is. It's word consciousness. So that when students learn a word, they're not just learning this is the definition of a word. They're learning about the word in context. They're learning about how the word is used. And they're learning about how to use the word and associate the word with ideas. And that's the idea of really building a solid foundation with vocabulary. Especially if you have a student who, vocabulary is not their thing, they're struggling with the spelling and the vocabulary, and you're looking for a way to really engage them, I think this would work really well. So like I said, $40 for the introductory price. When we roll out the others, we're gonna shift, I would say maybe from July, we're gonna shift to the regular prices. But for this one and the introductory prices, we're working with $40. So let me know if you're interested. I think it would be an awesome thing, definitely, for teachers to get a hold of, to get students really going with the vocabulary. And we're working with the frequently misspelt words that the Ministry of Education has put out. So that's why I said we're covering spelling and words and meaning plus comprehension, because you see there are comprehension passages in the worksheet packages as well, right? So, okay, so that is for, yeah, that was a little kind of addition, because I thought that I know parents ask me all the time, how do I improve vocabulary? How do I add the words? And so you would notice that many of those words, they are formal words, formal vocabulary words. So that is going to help with the formal vocabulary as well. In the first one, what we did was to do two fiction passages, but so that one there, in subsequent packages, we're doing one fiction, one non-fiction. So students are going to be introduced to non-fiction reading and writing as well. So they're going to get all of that information there. So, in the meantime, of course, you can always and most certainly um, work with the journal and how you would do the journal. Try to be as interactive as possible to get students to really um, explore and experience the information and become as word conscious as possible. All right, so yeah, thank you for allowing that little bit of interjection, but I think it is something that based on the questions that I've been asking and based on the questions, well, parents have been telling me this is what they need, and teachers have been saying this is what they wish they had, etc. And that's why I'm creating a lot of this information. So, okay, now we're on to plotting and narrative writing with plotting. And here, these are the things that we want to start with plotting. So, when we're plotting stories, we have to think of plotting instead of planning. Now, I know I spoke about this before, but again, remember, we're going to do a lot of repetition and so on. And so there's going to be, lots of things that we would be revisiting in different ways. And this is one of them that we will come back to very often because plotting is that important to this story. And here's why plotting is important, my top three reasons. Um, we want to make sure that students have distinct vocabulary for referring to the different kinds of writing that they have to do. So instead of saying planning, which would be reserved for report writing, we want to talk about plotting, which is reserved for narrative writing. So there would be like the two main differences in terms of vocabulary. For reports, we have planning a report about what participants do, and for a narrative, we're plotting stories about what characters do. So we have a different word for the people involved. People involved in a report would be a participant, the people involved in a story, character. And so, again, repetition because we've spoken about that before, but there are a couple other things. When we're plotting, we need to show connection between ideas. And that's an important thing. And that's why we're coming back to plotting at this point after we've done a little bit on conflict and rising action, because conflict and rising action have to do with connecting ideas, actions and reactions, conflict and response to the conflict. And so those are connections between the ideas, and that is really what you want to itemize in a plot, right? Plotting answers the questions how and why, especially when you're going through the plot in a story. You want to be able to answer how and why in the story itself, right? And then, so when you plot, you want to plot some of those details so that you can get into the habit of thinking, and students can get into the habit of thinking about how and why, answering those questions. So we're looking at it as um, sort of that interconnection, and with this interconnection, we're thinking about, doing the plot. And I don't think I have my poster here, but I do have the flashcards. Um, and so if you haven't already gotten a copy of your flashcards, you can get a copy of the poster along with the flashcards to help you really, get into plotting and fully understanding plotting. It follows the 12-point plot format that I work with and gives students lots of insight into that. There are a couple of games that you could work with on this. The flashcards and poster. You get a poster with the plot diagram. And I keep forgetting to pull out the poster. I have it somewhere. I should probably just stick it up. But it goes into detail, and so you get the poster, the flashcards, and if you buy the package, it comes with video lessons and worksheets, as well as like quizzes and those kinds of things. You get a lot of material, and that particular package is 295 for that. Let me put that up. So that's the 12-point poster package. Yeah, way to go for alliteration, right? Right? I think it is 245 actually. Um, it's on the website, so I'll put a link to it in the website as well. Yeah, it's 245. So 245 for that package, and you get the poster so you can put up. So remember, multisensory learning. And with multisensory learning, you want students to have like multiple touch points, multiple bits of interaction with the plot. With whatever it is they're working with. In this case, is the plot. So 12-point plot. And with that 12-point plot, what students are getting is a step-by-step development of plot and an idea of where they can actually add in the descriptions and all the different things that, flesh out the story. And so at this point, you really do want to revisit that. If you don't have a copy of that, then check me. There are different versions of it. If you want to get like sample stories that follow the 12 point that you could actually see, get prompts and so on, I have the narrative writing package, the 7 stories booklet that's digital as well. That one is just 145. So we have the 12-point package and then we have the 7 stories booklets. Well, we call it the 7 stories challenge. And that one is 145. And that one, for the 145, you get sample stories, you get prompts, you get worksheets, you get vocabulary ideas, you get descriptions of different types of stories, you get editing, analyzing. It's a complete package really meant for students who are not totally new to narrative writing, but they need a little bit more guidance. So it's a kind of like, I guess, a study package to study stories a little bit more closely. And you get sample stories and all those things, working together in that package. So that's the 7 stories challenge. And that actually gives you like a worksheet that you could use for plotting. You don't have to have the worksheet. If you don't want to get the package, that's totally fine. But I guarantee you the package is going to make things a lot easier because not only do you get that plotting worksheet, you actually get the sample stories where you can look at sample stories and see what is in the story, how the plot develops, how the descriptions work. So you get a lot more with the package. All right. So yeah, send me a WhatsApp message. You can find me on Facebook as well. Wood Coach Youth on Facebook. You can check me out in SEA Peacefield Approach. If you're not already a member in SEA Peacefield Approach, please join because there's lots of information there. And so we have the idea of plotting, the step-by-step approach to developing ideas. Then with the poster package, you're going to get all those details. It doesn't come with sample stories per se, but so this is like an introduction for those who are totally new. So it's actually probably ideal for standard 3s. Standard 3s and 4s could work really well with it, but like a standard 3 student who's now expanding their idea of understanding narratives and they're moving beyond the 3 paragraph story to longer stories. Yeah, that this package, 12 point, works perfectly for that age group. And so let me just back up a little bit before we get into the comprehension and give you your study and review agenda for the week. I I know I just realized that we didn't quite do that for the reports and the narratives, right? So let's do that. So report writing. what are we working on this week? Vocabulary. Remember, the study schedule works with like 3 sessions. So we have like two 30-minute sessions and one that could be a little bit longer, or you can stick with 30 minutes again. And so, since we're working on vocabulary, we want to spend the first session brainstorming vocabulary words that could be written in, that could be used generally, like approximately and, subsequently, and those kinds of transition kind of words and so on. We could add those to the list. But we also want to work on some like context specific vocabulary. So we have the 5 different types of reports, right? So we have incidents, accidents, competitions, events, and activities. And so what we want to do is to make a list of, let's say, 3 suggestions in each. So 3 activities, 3 incidents, 3 accidents, 3 competitions, 3 events. And so we have that list. And then we're brainstorming, like what could be happening in these situations. And then we're going to be looking at, all right, let's see some ideas. So based on the ideas and the things that are going to be happening, let's now start listing vocabulary words and seeing how they're used. So you might do that over the first like 2 or so sessions, 2 30-minute sessions, sort of mix it up. I would work with dealing with the events. So like incidents and accidents could go together. So we might do that one day, and then accidents, sorry, not accidents, activities and events could go on another day. Um, and I guess maybe the third day you might want to do like competitions and then do a sort of quiz to review some of the vocabulary words. And there are lots of different ways that we can explore vocabulary words while we're doing this, plus learning some spelling. Um, I what I use with my students, there is an app called Word Wall. It's something that I pay for. I don't recall if there is a free version, but most of these apps have limited access free version, so you can check it out. Let me put it up. It's Word Wall is the name of it, all one word. And I recently, you can have, and this, because I do all my classes online, these programs allow me to have lots of interactive sessions. And so we played, they can do like label diagrams, have them label diagrams. Like for the 12 point, we label the diagram. For we do crossword puzzles, word search, and for vocabulary, I use Hangman, of course, because they have to be able to spell the word accurately as well. And so we could do that. There are lots of interactive things. I already shared with you the Breads and Admiral, full body interactive game. So intersperse the brainstorming and so on with some activities that the student can use to, enjoy the exploration of the vocabulary. And then for the narratives, here's what you're doing this week for narratives. For narratives this week, you want to have students plot stories. And we're not starting with just a prompt just yet. We want to gradually get them into it, and we want to work with them while they're doing it at the beginning as well. So for the first thing, we want to maybe find a short video online. There are lots of videos online, short stories. You want to get something that is like 3 minutes or less. You could look up short stories for kids, animated shorts, lots of different ones. out there, get a couple of them and look at them, discuss the story, plot out the story, see if you can find the 12 point. And if something is missing or there's extra, discuss that and how it works together. And then you can also go back to, so in another session, go back to one of the students' previously written stories and see if they can find all the plot points. And if they can't, discuss how to add it in and that type of thing. And then in the third session is where you would want to introduce the prompt, like an SEA style narrative prompt, and then have the student plot it according to the worksheet. We're not timing or anything yet, we're just practicing plotting. And you want to do more than one plot activity, and this is the start of it. So from today, from this week, you want students plotting stories. So you can, plotting a story should not take more than 10-15 minutes, even at this point, before they get into the real habit of doing it. And so have them do that. They can do one a week. They can do for 15-minute sessions. They could do maybe one a day, depending on what else is happening and how busy. I know students have lots of activities, but you want to do multiple plotting of stories during a week, at least one. Ideal will be two or three, and you're gradually getting into it through looking at short films and plotting those, reviewing their own writing and plotting and seeing how it works, and then plotting stories from scratch, making sure, of course, that they understand each point in the 12 point and how it's connected with the other points to create the plot of the story. And so that's what you're doing for the narratives this week. So that's it for the reports and narratives. So now let's turn our attention to comprehension. So, a few things about the comprehension. We're beginning to read and focus on fiction writing this week. So, as always, we want to start with a definition. What is fiction? Fiction is pretty much a story, right? Um, and these are things that you want to point out and notice with fiction. So, one, fiction passages are usually longer than nonfiction. If you already have a copy of the SEA past papers, check it out and you would see the fiction passages usually all fit on one page. The nonfiction fits on one page. Fiction normally goes over at least half of the other page. And that's primarily because of the inclusion of dialogue or some kind of speech, but most often because of the descriptions and all the other things that are included. Fiction passages are generally a page and a half, nonfiction, most often one page that students are responding to when you look at the past papers. So that's definitely one of the first things you notice in terms of the difference. They are a bit longer in the sense of the length. They're not necessarily that much longer in terms of word count, but because of the formatting and how paragraphs are used and so on, they appear to be longer. And because of the inclusion of dialogue, they do stretch out longer in length than the nonfiction. So that's one. The second thing is that fiction passages follow narrative structure. So all those things that you're talking about in terms of plot and the development of plot and the responses and reactions of characters and all of that, that is what students are also engaging with when they read fiction. So this is an opportunity to really kind of, double down on the instruction and say, hey, remember when we were looking at the narratives, we spoke about plot? Well, guess what? Fiction has plot. So as an activity, you could probably take one of those fiction stories from even a past paper or one of those practice tests, if you have a hold of any of those, and try to plot it and see what happens. Chances are you might not get all of the rising action. You might just like get one or two, but you will get the plot in a fiction passage. You are going to get plot because a fiction passage is a story. And so, to help students recognize the connection between the two, that is an excellent activity to do. Plus, what you're doing is showing them that they can pull knowledge and information from other aspects of their learning as well. So, we're integrating the comprehension and the writing, the creative writing, by showing the overlap between the two. Fiction passages are stories, and so we can also use those for review of the narrative plot, just really to get students to see that connection. And well, of course, the third thing is that it includes dialogue. So those are the three like main issues when it comes to the fiction passages. And with the fiction passage, introducing students to that, that's the agenda this week. What does fiction look like? What are the elements of it? Same as the elements of plot, and we're looking at what plot looks like for fiction comprehension. And so for your first session, let me should go back there for reading fiction passages. So you want to go to the past papers, get a few get a few short stories. If you have the 12 point plot package, if you have the 7 stories package, for the creative writing, you can actually look at each of those. You would have 7 fiction passages in that you could review and look at the different elements of a fiction. And you can also create your own questions about those passages, so you kind of get like a twofold. So if you get that package is, remember, that one is the one for 145, right? That's the 7 stories challenge. You can use that for both fiction and comprehension um, discussion. So not just for the narratives, you could use it for the comprehension as well. So this week, that's what you're doing. You're going to go through what is a fiction passage, what does it look like, what are the unique characteristics of the fiction, which would be the length of it, because it's usually longer, which would also be the dialogue, which would be the descriptions of characters. And so you're doing that session one. Session two, you might look at, hey, since it's similar to the narrative, let's see if we could plot that. So we plot the fiction and see what that looks like. And then in the third session, you might want to read and discuss. Just generally, read some short stories and discuss the short stories. What do you think? Do you see what the characters do? Do you understand their behaviors? And really just kind of easing into the discussion of the fiction and fiction passages. All right, so that is our focus this week. And let me just do a quick recap of that. So you're seeing what we covered: formal vocabulary. And so you're working on building out that vocabulary journal. We have plotting stories, and we're working on getting, like, different videos, short stories that we can have students practice plotting. And then we're reading fiction, so we're understanding what it is, the unique elements of it, and how connected it is to short stories. And so you can overlap and do the same plotting activities that would benefit both comprehension and the narrative. All right, so that's the agenda. That's what you're working on this week. So I think, yeah, that's about it for today. Thank you so very, very much for those of you who were able to take in the live. And I will sincerely always say this: it helps me to see that there is at least 1 or 2 people who are there while I am speaking. So I'm not just talking to my computer and some random person. I'm actually talking to people who are here, you know, with students going toward SEA 2025. I appreciate all your comments. Please, feel free, type in a comment, send me a message, let me know if something was useful, if you need certain other details. I'm here to answer questions as well. I might not be able to answer all the time in terms of answer a phone call, but I do try to respond to WhatsApp messages. That's the best way to get me. And of course, if you for some reason don't remember my number, um, let me just put it up on the screen one last time before I close off. So you can get a copy of that, or of course, you can review the video and get the information. So packages I have available, we have the 7 stories challenge and the 12-point poster package, which has a lot of information there for you. So thank you again. Love to hear from you. Send me messages, send me questions, and I'll see you next week. Next week, we're going to be looking at nonfiction questions. We would be moving on from plotting stories, I believe, and um, formal vocabulary. If you don't already have the schedule, send me a WhatsApp. I can get you a copy of the schedule too. All right. So take care, everybody. Bye bye. Have a good one. And we are going out with some music.